Hello and welcome everyone. Please take a seat. I think we're 2 minutes late, so would love us to get started. Hello, welcome everyone. Please take a seat. Thank you all for being here. I think we are being connected online. So that is wonderful news. The audience is filling, and that is also wonderful news. This is a silent session, so please put on your headset, otherwise you will not be able to hear me. My name is Clea Kaske-Cook. I lead policy, advocacy and member mobilization at WBCSD and have been working together with many others, and you'll hear from many of them today, on the Stockholm Action Agenda on sustainable value chains. Thank you for joining us. We will be launching and we will be starting today's sessions with some welcoming remarks from our CEO and President, Peter Becker, who is joining us virtually. You also, and there is Peter, so thank you, Peter. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Clea. I hope you can hear me well, and technology beams me into the room. Good morning, everybody in Stockholm. Thank you very much for joining us for the launch of the Stockholm Action Agenda. I'm very honored to be here to celebrate 50 years of global environmental action. Stockholm Plus 50 recognizes the importance of multilateralism in tackling the Earth's triple planetary crisis: climate change, loss of nature and pollution. And it will serve as a springboard to accelerate the UN Decade of Action. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development were deeply committed to work with the world's leading companies to collectively develop and implement transformational solutions in order to transform businesses as well as their value chains. Our vision at WBCSD is a world in which more than 9 billion people live well within planetary boundaries. This meeting today in Stockholm celebrates 50 years of the environmental movement, and it's an important milestone to help us achieve this vision. The process leading to here has highlighted that we must take action quickly across all economic sectors to create a healthy planet for the prosperity of all and a secure and net zero, nature positive and equal future. To do this, we must lead as business and work with others to transform value chains. There's not much time left. Together with the Stockholm Environmental Institute, as well as in close collaboration with the United Nations Environmental Programme and the Government of Sweden's Secretariat for Stockholm Plus 50, we curated the process that led to this Stockholm Action Agenda on sustainable value chains. Over the course of 4 months, we led 2 consultation dialogues, launched a public survey, and also did research to identify practical ways to overcome the biggest roadblocks that business and other stakeholders face in scaling sustainability fastly across 6 global value chains: mobility, the built environment, electronics, fashion, food and agriculture, and travel and tourism. Over 70 global sustainability leaders from 34 export organizations have worked together. International institutions joined and leading multinational businesses. Business stayed engaged and committed to the dialogue, providing input, specific, actionable solutions to challenges affecting value chains, highlighting again how sustainability is now going mainstream and how value chain transformation is core to companies' long-term business strategies. The work identified 8 common transformation levers that will deliver the necessary structural changes to our global systems by 2030, ranging from the key work of finance, working with global capital markets, to disruption and innovation, as well as governance and radical collaboration. My colleague Dominic Warre, who's in the room with you, will share more about each of these common transformation levers, as well as the 3 practical action priorities that will help business around the world transform the sustainability of global value chains much faster and at bigger scale than today. The Stockholm Action Agenda shows the scale and speed of transformation is now apparent. We can only transform by collaborating with companies and partners to drive change within and across value chains and the system in which we all operate. The levers that the Stockholm Action Agenda has identified, as well as the 3 action priorities, will all be instrumental in helping drive action much faster. It's been 50 years since the Stockholm Summit, the first major global environmental gathering. Today, I hope that this year's summit will be another opportunity to bring about collective change towards a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient world. We all have a role to play in this historic gathering. And what we always say, it is time to transform now. We really hope that you will enjoy this discussion. Share the Stockholm Action Agenda widely with your colleagues and peers. And thank you for your leadership over the next 2 days and beyond. So thank you. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you, Peter, for these inspiring words. I had some technical challenges with the mic. I'm now here to introduce our senior advisor to the CEO, to Peter, Dominic Worry. Thank you, Dominic, for being here and for really guiding us and supporting us to bring this Stockholm Action Agenda to life. So please do join us, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. So here's a test. Can you all hear okay? Oh, look at that. If you can't, there's a volume control and such, but it's quite a good innovation because it allows us to be able to hear each other clearly and not with the other stage over there. So if at any time you feel it's a bit stuck, just look at the volume control of the channel. For those of you who work in the United Nations, you use these things all the time, I'm sure. The other thing is it's infrared, so don't put it in your pocket, keep it on your lap so that the beams can get to the headset, okay? So with that, here's the next technological test. Oh, go back to the former slide. You saw a QR code up there. There we are. No paper. Get your phone and download the Stockholm Action Agenda, and then you'll be able to refer to what it is that we're going to be talking about over the next period of time. Very good. If you haven't got your phone out yet, do it now and download it because it's really cool. It's the best thing you're going to read in the next 2 days. Not that we are collaboratively competitive, but it's full of really, really good ideas. Okay, well done. So, welcome to this launch session of the Stockholm Action Agenda. My name is Dominic Worry. I'm a special advisor to the CEO and President of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Peter Backer, who you just heard. And we're in these discussions at Stockholm Plus 50, the international meeting, 50 years since the first Environment Development meeting, with the slogan, "A healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility and our opportunity." And those are really carefully chosen words by the organizers because we know some of the challenges that we face. We know what the science is telling us, and we almost kind of know what needs to be done. That's our responsibility. Our opportunity is to turn that into, okay, how do we get this stuff fixed? What are the mechanisms that we can put into place to make this happen? That really is the ethos and the thrust of the discussion today. To that extent, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage, and you can see on the screen that we're going to be talking to Manz Nilsson, the Executive Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute. If you're in Sweden, you will know Manz inside out. He leads probably one of the most influential organizations based in Sweden to look at environmental issues. We've had a delightful collaboration with your organization, and particularly through Robert Ward, wherever he is, and the team on this. So, Mads, we're going to have a little bit of a conversation, so you can take a seat.
Lovely. Thank you.
About kind of what on earth is this whole thing? The Stockholm Action Agenda? Is it what to improve the city? Is it bigger than that? What's going on? So we're going to have a chat with each other, I think, a little bit, and hopefully that will allow you to learn a little bit more about what has been going on. So, Mads, over to you.
Maybe to kick off, to explain a little bit what SEI has been doing. I mean, this initiative, together with the World Business Council, has been very important for us. But why it's been important. Actually, the name Stockholm Environment Institute doesn't come from this city, this rainy city, but actually from the Stockholm 72 conference and the Stockholm Declaration. This is where we've derived our principles, our identity, our mandate, you could say. This was the first meeting at the global scale where there was a recognition of the inextricable connection between environment and development, and this is really the ethos that we carry. So we've invested quite a lot in supporting the preparation of this conference, both with the organizers UNEP and with the hosts Kenya and Sweden. And we've been also delivering a scientific report on the themes of the conference. And I'm delighted to say, looking at this action agenda, that there's also quite a bit of, you could call it overlap or synergy between these separate initiatives and reports. So, for example, the theme of accountability and data that we need to drive the transition, but also for the supply chain focus and the value chain focus overall, which is really front and center in a lot of what we do today in SEI.
It's so interesting, Mads, because probably for those of you sort of aficionados, it was 50 years ago that this conference in Stockholm, 1972, was a brilliant innovation to bring together folks who are looking at the environmental issues. Because don't forget, in space, it was the first time around that time that we saw the planet from the moon, the blue marble, that famous photo. It was a mind shift change. Environmental organizations were created. New science was created. The limits to growth panel was created. Yet at the same time, there was fears about energy shortages. There was an energy crisis. There was fears about food shortages. That's where the consultative group of international agricultural research came through. There were worries about the strength of global cooperation, Cold War. So in a way, you know, what has changed and what hasn't changed, but the innovation in 1972 was amazing. Insofar as we are interconnected, we have to grow value and grow prosperity. We have to have now, I guess, Manz, close to 9 billion people, if we look forward a couple of decades, who can live well. And now we use this phrase, within our planetary boundaries. And that's kind of the sort of insertion point, I think, of the Stockholm Environment Institute. It's been such a practical set of recommendations. And this work, I think it was with the CEEW from India that was a big report that you put forward, was a huge consultation effort, I think, to look for key areas for the conference.
Absolutely. We had a large international advisory panel with representatives from all over the world and also a big range of institutions supporting and as I said, co-authoring and co-collaborating with the CEEW from India. But Dominic, maybe we should get into today's business and talk a little bit about this action agenda. So I'd like to start by asking why? Why at this point did you choose to, and at this meeting, did we choose to focus on the value chains?
Well, that's a great question, Manz, and thank you for that. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development was born in the Earth Summit of 1992, so that's 30 years ago, and it has about 220 or so of the leading businesses in the world who are exploring and pushing and shaping that sustainability agenda. I'm delighted we've got some in the audience, and we'll hear more from them later. The invitation, and again, it's that innovation agenda, I think, that, if I may say so, our friends from Sweden are so good at, internationalists, but also innovation-driven. And the government of Sweden and the representatives, together with Kenya for this meeting, said, you know what, let's not just have a government kind of conversation, but given where the world is at, and given how it's been global value chains, like fashion or electronics or construction and the built environment, or mobility and that shift to electric vehicles and all of these things and energy systems that run right through all of that and the finance, if these are the motor of the global economy, and we are worried from the science that our sustainability limits, our planetary boundaries are being broken, climate, nature and the loss of biodiversity, and importantly on the social side as well, that rising level of inequality, what is it that could be done more in those global value chains to really transform, as we heard from Peter Backer, transform the world that we live in? If that's the driver of prosperity and growth and jobs, what do we need to, and who should we ask? We should ask the businesses, the leading businesses who have multiple initiatives or activities that are going on in these value chains to try and tackle that. Number one. Who was at the Glasgow COP for climate? Okay, that's brilliant. I'd say about half the audience there, Manz. You saw in Glasgow, I think, the culmination of maybe a decade of effort, which saw a mobilization of businesses and coalitions and collaborations and all sorts of things from heavy industry. And by the way, the Swedes, together with India, were part of the Lead It coalition to bring heavy industry into the climate activities. So thank you for that. Methane, forests, all sorts of collaborations and coalitions. And there's amazing work going on and there's progress being made. But the speed and the scale of that transformation has to happen at a different level. So what are the roadblocks that each of those activities are starting to face, which might be common roadblocks across all those different activities? And how can we bring that back to you and colleagues who are close to the international community to make really crystal clear recommendations? If you did these 5 things, we could unlock so much more. That's the action in the action agenda. And the Stockholm bit has such an important heritage because this is where the innovation came from back in 1972, people and planet, environment and development. So how could you say no to that invitation, which came to us from the government here, and of course our close friends at UNEP. So that's kind of the background to it.
It's great to see how the convergence of these perspectives actually across some of the most important international initiatives. So Lead It, for example, that had a big meeting here yesterday, also has a very deep focus on value chains, actually.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about the process? How have you gone about doing this?
Yeah, certainly. And actually, from the Action Summit in 2019 for climate that the Secretary General set up, where Leader joined, I was very lucky to be in the committee there on the industry side from representing business organizations. We learnt a lot. And so for this process, back in the spring, we asked our members in the World Business Council for Sustainable Development who would like to join a series of roundtables and talk about where the state of the world is at on these global value chains. The 6, if you've downloaded your QR code and you have a document in front of you, you already know what those 6 value chains are. Electronics, fashion, mobility, construction, food and agriculture, and travel and tourism. Things that are driving the world economy with the energy system all the way through that. What is the state of the value chain? And if you had a pencil and a piece of paper, how would you define what that value chain looks like now and where the challenges are to it on social issues, on environmental issues? Where are the great initiatives that you are involved with from a business perspective, which are fixing or trying to fix bits of the sustainability challenge along those value chains? And importantly, Manz, what more needs to be done? Where is it that if only we had that practical engagement with policymakers or governments who could help to harmonize standards, create level playing fields, have common definitions, what would that look like? So that was the process, and it was an amazing journey which revealed an awful lot of texture. And your colleagues and team at the Stockholm Environment Institute were brilliant in terms of synthesizing that into some wonderful diagrams and pictures, identifying 8 levers of change, which you'll see in the document, the sorts of things around finance and capacity building and circularity, which has come through again and again and again, and accountability and transparency. Diluting those down into a kind of almost like a synthesis of what could then be sort of 3 big ideas, which we as a group who sometimes are close to, but we're not responsible for that international process. What would those 3 big things be? And that's the action spaces.
The action priorities that are central to this piece, right?
That's right. That's right.
So what are they?
So number 1, in no particular order, they're all. It's a systems change, so they're all connected. So have in your mind a connected web. Number 1, You've mentioned it already, and it's come up, I think, from some of the opening dialogues, accountability and transparency. So it's been an amazing movement from the business and financial community, which have just really responded to the sustainability challenge on behalf of shareholders and stakeholders and customers and suppliers and consumers. But if you were today to say, okay, well, how's it all going? Where do I go to find out how in different sectors or collectively that business mobilization is doing against science-based targets to help fix this problem, whether it's climate change or perhaps also pollution or nature, or indeed on social justice issues? Where do you go to find? It's hard. If it's hard for us, and we're close to this, it's hard if you're a citizen, and it's hard if you're a policymaker wanting the best information about that, so you know who the leaders and champions are and who is not so much a leader and champion. So an accountability and transparency mechanism which will harmonize all that information and make it really easy for leaders from business, from finance, and from governments to say, okay, that's how it's going, and those are the people who are doing really, really well. I need to talk to them. And hang on a minute, where are the people from my country who are kind of leading business? Where are they? And then organizations like SEI, like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or others can then help bring people along on that journey and illustrate best practices of how to move. Accountability and transparency, number one. Number two, a circularity protocol. Anybody who's followed this for some time will recall that the Montreal Protocol was created to tackle a specific problem to do with hydrofluorocarbons, which were eating up the ozone layer. And there was an amazingly innovative governmental process led by the United States, George Bush Sr., to actually engage with science and say, what exactly is the problem? And with businesses who have the technology and capabilities to innovate. And that has arguably created, after quite interesting interactions between business, science, and governments, the most successful global protocol. The ozone layer is not, we haven't fixed it, but it's certainly kind of got better. And people cite that as a very, very effective mechanism. Circularity across electronics, across fashion, across food and agriculture, across all of those value chains and many more, again and again and again. And if you're in the business community, you'll know that there's so much to unlock in terms of innovation in materials, in process efficiency, and in not waste but end of first life, but so many barriers which exist around harmonization of standards, of definitions, of transboundary shipment of secondary materials, roadblock, a protocol that helps to get rid of all of that and unlocks a huge wealth of growth. And the third one, skills and capacity building. Not just this kind of skills that we might need if we shift from the old economy to the new economy, which UNIDO and UNEP and ILO and others have got great programs on, but could we dock more with business to have more information there? But also the capacity within the international and SME business sector to move quickly and understand this sustainability transformation. What do I need to know about the changing nature of fiduciary responsibility in my enterprise? What do I need to know about the regs and the rules? What do I need to have as capacity to build collaboration, not just within my enterprise, but across a value chain, and create the partnerships and collaborations that we need, and engage with experts like yourself and with others from the international community. So that whole slice of collaboration, and then supported by just a massive push on innovation, entrepreneurialism, new business build. The unicorns of tomorrow will not be in that FTSE 1000 of today. We can already see that in terms of churn. And they might not be only from Sweden or Europe or the US. There's probably 2 or 3 billionaires in waiting. She's in Nigeria somewhere, she's in Turkey, she's in Indonesia. And how do we get there to unlock that innovation about the kind of businesses that we need to deliver a planet that everybody, 9 billion people, can live well within our planetary boundaries? So those are the three things. And then there's a cross-cutter, which is we still need to engage in that dialogue about redefining value, that whole ESG piece where business meets finance meets policymakers about, is it just discounted cash flow and a quarterly return to shareholders, or are there other forms of value here which can be inculcated and put into the system? We created that system. We created GDP. We can create metrics which better understand and respond to the boundaries that we live in. So those are the things.
So accountability and transparency, circularity protocol, and skills and capacity agenda.
Perfect.
Those are the three. And of course, there's going to be a lot of detail to work out. But if we move to wrapping up here, how do you see this could shape up within the framework of Stockholm Plus 50? Do you have any hopes for what will come out of it, perhaps in terms of these three, or where do you see movement?
Manz, I really appreciate that question in terms of kind of landing this. And it might feel that this is the most difficult of times, but it might also be the most opportunistic of times. In 1972, you had a moment where people said, you know what, we've really got to bring together business and governments and look at how we shape a curve for growth. 1987, Gro Harlem Brundtland, Sustainable Development. Here we have a moment where the international community, international collaboration is tough. It's particularly tough at the moment. But we have some topics here where a kind of real interesting structure between business, civil society, science and government could perhaps create some of those overarching harmonized structures that could really punch through, like things like the Montreal Protocol did, and give confidence again to the international system. So I know, and we're going to hear, I think, from a fabulous speaker in a moment, your former Prime Minister, about ideas around reshaping and rethinking about what that multilateralism can look like. And I think in the sustainability agenda, given the role of business, we have such a super opportunity. Yeah. That's the next step.
Let's make this the moment. We had the 72 conference. It was really a lot about institution building. We created the whole global sort of awareness. We created institutions such as the UN Environment Programme. We created research institutes and conventions and so on. And then we've had 50 years of knowledge building. Technologies have been innovated and developed, and targets and goals have been set. But it's not happening. Now, 50 years later, we need that moment of sort of action.
If the late great Maurice Strong was sitting here, and he was a Canadian miner who then moved to the UN, and he was the instigator, along with Sweden, for the 1972 conference. He created the idea of UNEP. 1992, UNFCCC, Convention on Climate Change, Convention on Biodiversity, Convention on Desertification. Innovate, innovate, innovate was always his mantra. And the last 10 years, I'd say, we've had such an insertion of energy from the business and financial community, which has moved a bit faster than the international fabric, maybe.
Yeah.
You can see that when you've been to the COPs, right, where the energy is placed. Now we have a brilliant opportunity to harness that and almost recalibrate with punch some elements of the international system. So that's what we hope with the Stockholm Action Agenda, and that's been the brilliant invitation from our hosts here at Sweden, and with the great collaboration from the Stockholm Environment Institute.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dominic.
Thank you, Manz.
And I'll leave you on the stage.
Yeah, I'm still here. But thank you so much, and a big round of applause for SEI. They've done a great piece of work. Okay, so hope that gives a kind of a feel and a bit of context for what we've been up to. And now, with that tee up, it's my absolute delight to welcome to the stage Stefan Leuven. If you're Swedish, this person needs no introduction. For those of you watching online, probably most of you, this person needs no introduction, but the Prime Minister of Sweden from 2014 to 2021, a real innovator and champion of the importance of multilateralism, effective multilateralism, and now the co-chair of the United Nations Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on exactly looking, I think, at some of these issues, sir, on effective multilateralism. It's such a delight to have you.
Thank you.
And the floor is yours to say a few words.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. This is so important, and I must say to begin with that I'm very happy to see this action agenda and the broad perspective that you have taken, because business sector is so important in this transformation that is so needed. Yesterday we ended the second physical meeting with the High-Level Advisory Board. We have had 3 meetings, and our task is also to find out how do we do. We already have the Paris Agreement, we have the SDGs, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. So all this, we know what we need to do. It's just that we do too slow and too little. So we have been given the task by the Secretary General to work with the report that will be launched in January next year with concrete proposals on how to do. How do we better deal with health issues? The pandemic was a really clear eye-opener that on the one hand, we could actually deliver and develop a vaccine much, much faster than anyone could have believed. 1 year. It took 1 year. Everybody said at least 5 years. It took 1 year. Then came the backdrop. Then nations stopped export of substances or vaccines, and we had a huge problem. We still have a huge problem because too many of the world's population is still not vaccinated, although we know that nobody's safe until everybody's safe. So we know that. Here, I believe, is a clear potential for the business sector. It wasn't the business, it wasn't the enterprise's fault. It wasn't them to blame. It was much of politics, because every politician sat and held on to what they had because they needed to show their own population, we're doing the best we can for you. And then again, that was a huge mistake, because we knew that nobody's safe until everybody's safe. So what we need to do on that issue is obvious, and that is to make sure that the value chain works from the very start until the very end. So going from developing a vaccine, we must also make sure that the logistics works. We must make sure that in every part of the world there are someone that can actually give you the shot, because that's where things happen. So this whole chain needs to be restructured, rules, whatever, and here the business sector plays an important role in negotiating with politicians, and so that we together can make sure that next time this happens, we not only develop a new vaccine much faster, we can also make sure that much faster everybody gets vaccinated, or whatever he or she needs. So that's a very clear task. We also work from the horizontal perspective. We are too much into silos. We work with one issue there and one issue there. We have one fund for a specific problem or a specific issue, and another fund for that, and another fund for that. We must work much more horizontal. And that brings me to the other, one of the other main issues that we are working with now, and that is climate, obviously. Here is we must make sure that we never go above 1.5 degrees. We know that. And if we decide, politics, society, business sector, civil society, individuals, that this is what we're going to achieve, then we will achieve it. We will achieve it. And here is, I think, a very important perspective that you are pushing in your agenda, the more positive. Because I think that one of our problems has been that we only talk about the doom and gloom. And with that, I do not mean to say that we can't talk about what's at risk. We must do that. So we must know, everybody, what is at stake here. But then shift that into possibilities, like you mentioned here. Possibilities. Because what we see now, beginning of at least, I believe, in Sweden, is it's getting visible. What is this transition about? Yesterday, they showed this new, the new, was it a bus produced by only fossil-free steel? A bus produced fossil-free steel? I have a little piece of fossil-free metal at home that was given by SSAB, the company that produced it. So now we can see the battery factories people can start to see, wow, that's the transition. So this is smart for the climate, obviously, but it is also the smart thing to do for future jobs. Where we have the future technology, we have the future jobs. And where we have the future jobs, we have the future welfare. Because welfare takes jobs. So now we can start to visualize and we can talk about the serious risks that we're challenged with, but also the possibility. We will use that into possibilities. And when we start moving in that direction, I think we will also speed up. So here business is very, very important. Just a third perspective, if I'm allowed. We need so much development around the world. We have all over the world some 160 million children exposed to child labor. Children that ought to be going to school. They do not go to school. They're not allowed to go to school. They must work because they must help supporting their families. We have at least 700 million people around the world that lack electricity. They have no energy. This is a huge problem. It is a huge risk because if that continues, we will all face more conflict, probably more war, social unrest. And that will affect not only them, it will affect us eventually. So here's a business opportunity. I think that governments, politics, with the business sector, with the financial, not least, sector, and others can do more to make sure that we develop, we invest in people. Because when we invest in people, those people that are poor today, if they are also given chances to develop their lives, their income, they will also contribute to the economy. It's not harder than that. They will also contribute. I used to tell people working at Volvo that we must regard our development aid as an investment. If people at other countries, other continents also will be given the chance to raise their living standard, perhaps one day they will also start thinking of buying a car, hopefully an electric car. And why not a Volvo? But if they cannot raise their living standard, that won't be possible. So my point is, I think we need to restructure our international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and the regional development banks. I think we need to cooperate more with the financial sector because we need to bring in more money and regard that as an investment. Make the business cases also. It's one thing is the moral perspective, that is important, but also make the business case that eventually it will pay off. Perhaps not next year, perhaps not the year after that, but it will pay off. So those are a few comments that I wanted to deliver.
Prime Minister Leuven, that was brilliant. And from all of us here, are all internationalists at heart, and we're so excited about the kind of the process that you're going to be leading to look at this slightly new fabric for multilateralism and some of the very practical ideas that are coming out of this sort of process. We're delighted to help share and see how these things can inspire and be taken forward. Yeah. So we're there with you for whatever you need.
That's good.
And it's exactly that kind of mindset which imbued and supported and drove this action agenda from your compadres in the Swedish government. So thank you, sir.
Thank you
for all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Leuven. So you can see some of the shapes that are starting to shift in the international space. So from Prime Minister Leuven and the big panel that he's going to be using and taking some of these ideas, I'm sure, into to a little bit more closer to home. So at the end of this year, of course, it's COP 27. Then next year, in 2023, it's COP 28. And COP 28 is in the United Arab Emirates, and it has something called the global stocktake, which is another kind of mechanism of how are we doing on this journey. Do you remember this piece about the accountability and transparency? So delighted to welcome to say a few words. Dane McQueen, on behalf of His Excellency Miriam bin Mohammed Saeed Harab Al Meheri of the UAE, he's the UAE Minister of Climate Change. Dane has the job, in a way, of making this all happen. So here's the man of the moment for the global stocktake and the UAE COP. So, Dane, I don't know if any of this kind of resonates with you. You've got an incredibly exciting task with the Minister and the whole team at UAE for the COP, but we'd all be delighted to hear a few early words from yourself as the Director of Partnerships and Programs, almost, I guess, trying to architect with and for the government of how this will work. Dane, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dominic, and thank you so much to the organizers for the invitation to be with you. We're quickly learning as we prepare for the presidency that continuity is probably our biggest friend, and finding efforts that have clear deliverables and good partners is going to be the key to our success. So the Stockholm Action Agenda is one of those anchor points for us, and we look forward very much over the next 18 months and beyond to embed that into our strategy and into the presidency approach. So, we have kind of, an overarching vision where we know that Glasgow was excellent for 2050, and now the pressure is to talk about what happens in 2025, 2023, 2030. And we've been thinking that having more of this sector by sector, value chain by value chain approach would be useful. Some of that unpacking started in Glasgow, and very good private sector mobilization, and we would like to accelerate that process. And really work with each sector to come up with their own roadmap, and to understand what they see as the main outcomes needed in that space. Is it an investment package around innovation? Is it a policy change? What are the 2 or 3 things per sector that we as the presidency should be lobbying everyone to sign up to? And there's kind of 2 main modalities for that we see. And I'm really happy you mentioned the global stocktake, because it's not a term that's very well known, although you'll hopefully hear about it a lot. And that's the procedural side. And then there's the coalitions of the willing side. And so on the procedural side, the Paris Agreement has asked that we assess where we are in next year. But I think we know the results already in a way. And the more important part will be what the formal response to that stocktake is. And so what we'd like to do is have a cover decision in Abu Dhabi that goes sector by sector and says this is the travel of direction that we need. It's 197 countries, so getting that level of granularity is probably a pipe dream. But we'd still like to force that conversation. And then in parallel, work on this coalitions of the willing side and bring together the different value chains that you've outlined. Some more. I was also at Lead It yesterday, which is going to be another really important vehicle for us, and start rallying people around these industry and government prescribed next steps on decarbonization. So that's kind of our approach at the moment. And like I said, it's really going to be based on working with existing efforts, existing champions, not creating new initiatives, and trying to just consolidate around these very data-driven and also morally driven outcomes that we need. So thank you very much.
Dane, really appreciate that. I'm sure there's going to be loads of people coming up to you now and saying, kind of here's this and here's that. But the beauty here is you're already 2 years out or a year and a half out thinking about this and kind of structuring those processes. It feels like we're now kind of embedded into our kind of climate COP process of the business and the finance and these coalitions of the willing, as well as the folks who are kind of seeing how the process of the Paris Agreement is ongoing. So that's brilliant. I think kind of what we might be hearing as well is that time and time again, even the biggest coalitions that are out there, they hit these roadblocks. On kind of harmonization of standards or definitions or things which the international community through processes like COP or through a stocktake can, if we just remove those 2 things, And I think that's a very, very interesting dimension, which I think Prime Minister Leuven was referring to when he talked about the vaccine development, which wasn't a smooth process, and lots of kind of collaboration had to be worked out very quickly. So there's an enormous potential here, I think, and we're all excited about the vision that you put forward. If you had any if you had hopes and anxieties, if you're able to share, you must feel kind of like, oh my goodness, I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, every day you sort of see the broadening scope of what is possible and what you could do, and so trying to drill down into those 5 or 6 big things that you can realistically achieve, and also understanding what the value of the presidency is and isn't.
Yeah.
Has been a reason to lose sleep, but we will be looking to people like Dominic to help us through this process, and really when people come to us and say I want to do something, we see our role as pointing people to existing platforms, that this is the place where if you want to do something on steel, you want to do something on fast fashion, please plug in. We'll never have a formal prospectus, but what we'd like to do is at least informally have a sense of, these are the different docking points, sector by sector, value chain by value chain, and these are the deliverables that we would expect you to think about. So just to help to narrow the conversation a bit. Wonderful. So that it's not 1.5 writ large, but it's here's in my sector, this is the the investment that I'm going to make in an innovation, or that I'm going to make on the policy side, or something more concrete.
Dane, thank you for your thoughtfulness and for your honesty there. You have a group of friends in the room and the network to draw upon.
Hope so.
It's very exciting. I think this element of the accountability and transparency piece that came through could be a very useful non-party, to use the sort of UN words in these things, adjunct to the global stocktake. So there's some ideas already coming through thick and fast. So we're all excited for you and to work with you on this journey. So thank you so much for sharing that, Dane. Okay, so our little transition now is to bring to you some thoughts and reflections from some of the businesses that were involved in this process, and that are working on some of these issues from these value chains and some of the, if you like, kind of on the ground experiences. So we have a few who will be joining us virtually, and I'll be welcoming a few onto the stage here. So if I could welcome onto the stage Annika Bresky, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Stora Enso. Welcome, Annika. Jacob Kiefer, who is the with ABB and is in charge of corporate affairs and sustainability. And also Wan Sayuti Wan Hussein, who's the head of strategy and policy for corporate sustainability of Petronas, which is the state-owned company in Malaysia. And then on the screen, if all of this works rather beautifully, I'm delighted to welcome Sonny Verhees, who is the founder and group CEO of Olam, which is a very large food and agriculture conglomerate headquartered in Singapore. Welcome, Sonny. Erik Solheim, who many of you will know from the International Secretary, former Executive Director of UNEP, former Minister of Environment of Norway, and now a key advisor for April, which is another very large kind of paper, pulp and agricultural player over in Indonesia. Welcome, Erik. And then finally, Alicia Orberger, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Baker McKinsey, the global law firm, which brings a very, very interesting perspective into this, has been part of these task forces and work. So, Alicia, welcome. So thank you, first of all, very much for being good sports to be here and to share kind of, insight with the audience. And thank you for joining us online. It's working seamlessly. For those of you who are online, you're really big. And so you're kind of looming as massive smiley faces across the audience. So welcome. We're going to start, I think, if we can, Erik, with you. Because, you've got a special perspective, I think. Perhaps some of the things that Prime Minister Leuven was saying resonated. You've been in the ministerial hot seat on environment. You've run UNEP. You're now on the company side. And this approach of bringing business and coalitions of the willing into the delivery mechanism, I know is something that you've been thinking a lot about. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dominic. And good morning, Stockholm. Happy to be with you all. let me start with an experience from Singapore. A few years back, I was talking to an audience of bankers, a big bankers gathering in Singapore. They were all a little bit stiff with blue jackets, all with ties, and they all looked like bankers, to put it that way. But I was very lucky because I happened to speak about the purpose of business, that the purpose of banking is not to make profit. Banking was invented with a purpose to finance bridges and cities, to make innovations in agriculture and garment. It was there for people. And I could see the audience, they were really getting taller and taller in the chairs because they were so eager to take part of that. They made good money for sure, but they also wanted a much wider purpose for the job, simply banking for people. And that's what we are now seeing with the ESG, environment, sustainability and governance, taking charge of basically every major business everywhere in the world. And this is, of course, also exactly what Stefan Leuven was talking about, the positive opportunity of environmentalism. The positive environmentalism, not just avoid the problems of climate change, pollution, or destruction of nature, but to set out the opportunities for an ecological civilization. And that opportunity is now there because for the first time in history, there is no choice to be made between economy and ecology. We have all the policies, all the technologies, and all the finances to do exactly both at the same time, both create jobs and economic prosperity and protect the planet. And remind yourself, this is very different from a few decades back when Thatcher, Reagan dominated the intellectual scene, and the big light was Mr. Friedman, who said that the purpose of business is profit. You simply don't hear that any longer. Profit is essential, but the purpose of business is to make life better for people, and it must happen with a view to the environment of planet Earth. And one company which has really taken this to heart is April. April is the biggest paper and pulp company in the world and one of the biggest palm oil companies in the world, headquartered in Singapore, main business in 3 of the most important developing countries, Indonesia, China, and Brazil. And April is not a company of saints. They made a lot of contributions to environment problems in the past, but they have decided to change. And that is a very firm commitment from the top level of the company. And when COVID started in the world, they decided to go for what they call April 2030. That was exactly what you, Dominic, set out, focus on skills, on transparency, and on circular economy. They involve for sure all the staff, they involve governments, they involve the banking sector, the finances, they involve the customers, they basically involve everyone. They even brought in outside advisors like myself to make sure this process was leading to a new April, and that's what we are seeing now. And I think 3 promises by April stand out, and they can also inform others. First, 0 deforestation. Deforestation is a crime. We cannot destroy the lungs of the world, the rainforest. And now in 2020, for the first time in modern history, there was no deforestation in Indonesia, thanks to good policies of the government, but of course also thanks to the efforts of companies like April. In Indonesia, in the island of Sumatra, April has set up the so-called 1-to-1 principle. That is, for every square meter of plantation forest they use for the paper and pulp machines, April will conserve 1 square meter of rainforest. And frankly, that's probably the most beautifully conserved rainforest in Indonesia, simply because April has the helicopters, the fire brigades, all the logistics which you need to make sure that there are no incursions into the rainforest. It's a fantastic area of wetlands, peatlands, and virgin forest. Secondly, April promised to be, as many other companies, a 0 emissions company, a carbon neutral company. And they will do that by going massive into solar energy. And of course, so through that, they're also creating a very rapidly increasing market for solar energy in Indonesia and the other countries where they are mainly involved. And thirdly, April is big in viscose. It's the biggest viscose company in the world. So they make about a huge, viscose is about 10 to 15% of all garments in the world, and April is the biggest producer here. They want to go circular. So they set aside a substantial amount of money to research into circularity. Look to the fact we are throwing away 99% of all clothes we make on planet Earth.
Eric, that's
what a problem, what a shame economically and environmentally. And April has promised that they will make the research needed to stop this, and they're working with the government of Singapore to make the practical ways for people to handle it in.
Eric, that's so interesting about the circularity piece combined with the net zero and combined with the avoided deforestation and those very, very practical interventions that you're saying. And I'm sure, as you said at the beginning, the enabling environment that could help to speed up April's circularity transformation on viscose is some of the things that we're looking for to allow the speed and scale of the transformation that you're helping to lead April on. So super, super interesting. And thank you so much for that. I'm sorry to cut you off in mid-flow. We're going to come back and maybe have some more discussion. But I just want to hold on to those three things because it's illustrative of a company that perhaps is now going on this transformation and needs that enabling environment that you've helped to build over the years to speed things up. Sonny Verhees, if I can turn to you, founder and chairman, executive chairman of Olam, based also headquartered in Singapore. Some of those things that Eric might have said from April's perspective probably resonate. I know there's some amazing programs that you've instigated and driven through Olam, and perhaps some of the action agenda issues on capacity building and skills, or on circularity, or on accountability and transparency also resonate. But we'd be delighted to hear from you, Sonny. Over to you. Oh, Sonny, you're on mute, I think.
I'm sorry for that, and thank you, Dominic. I won't focus today on what Olam is doing. I want to focus on how we have formed a pre-competitive coalition of the participants in the food and ag sector to do or achieve systems transformation in pivoting the global food and ag sector to a more sustainable model. We are now about 7.95 billion people on the planet. We were less than 2 billion people in 1900. So the global food and ag system has done quite well to feed a growing population and keep prices reasonably affordable for the folks who are below the poverty line as well. But business as usual will not suffice to help us provide the growing demand for food, feed, and fiber of a growing population estimated to be well over 10 billion people by 2050. So how do we change and have systems transformation in the food and ag sector? I want to talk of one pre-competitive coalition that the industry has come together to co-create. So we have many suppliers and many customers, including brand owners and retailers, who have come together and launched this venture, which is a one-stop sustainability and insights platform, a digitally enabled sustainability insights platform, as a reference platform of the food and ag sector, focused on 10 sustainability topics, including the outcome areas of being climate positive, nature positive, livelihood positive, with good governance. We have agreed on over 340 metrics across the 10 sustainability topics. We have agreed on the way we will define them, the way we will measure them, the way we will collect data. So we standardize, and the way we will get that externally verified and assured, so that our customers, whether it's a brand owner or a retailer, has comparative data cross-commodity wise, cross-regionally, to be able to compare the performance by different suppliers on these key sustainability metrics. We are in the MVP development stage at this point in time. This coalition was created and formed in October of 2021. We hope to be able to launch the product sometime in the last quarter of 2022. And we are also involving other partners, whether it's governments, NGOs, civil society, whether it's financial institutions that lend to the food and ag sector, to influence, have a voice in agreeing on this common sustainability reference platform. And that has given me a lot of encouragement because we are an intensely competitive industry. We really hate each other's guts. We don't come together on anything unless the world is literally burning down. And the world is literally burning down. So I think before we get the rap of big bad food and agri, like big bad pharma and big bad oil, it is in our self-interest to make sure that we are able to achieve an end-to-end systems transformation in making the food and ag sector more sustainable. I'm happy to take any questions on the process that has been followed, where we stand, etc., if there is time left in the panel. But we believe that there are 5 levels of change that we need to achieve to truly achieve this systems transformation. One is individual change, second is company change, but the one that we're working on now is a sector change, a sectoral roadmap on how we can pivot the whole food and ag system to a more sustainable one. We also need government and policy action, and they have to come to the party in terms of carbon tax, mandatory disclosures on natural capital, social capital, human capital, etc. And we also need unnatural collaborations with civil society and NGOs. They consider private sector as evil. We consider them as troublemakers. We're always at loggerheads, and that will not allow us to solve some of these existential developmental challenges that confront us.
Sonny, it's brilliant. And again, thanks for your honesty and thoughtfulness in that overview. So for people who perhaps don't appreciate that, how many companies have you managed to pull together into this pre-competitive collaboration?
So there are, at this point in time, 4 co-creators, many still evaluating to join. So it is a neutral platform, not owned by any one company. We expect, therefore, eventually this will have 25, 30 people who co-own this business. And we will have probably 50, 60 customers who will be on this platform. We want a minimum of 50% of the flows of the selected cross commodities that we are going to be talking about, food commodities that we're going to be talking about, data, sustainability data on these 300 odd metrics or 340 odd metrics to be available, externally verified, assured, so that the methodology of how we are measuring it and reporting it and the transparency with which we share that data will help us then yank the whole sector to becoming more sustainable.
Brilliant, Sonny, that's so interesting. So Prime Minister Leuven, when you're talking about these new kinds of collaborations, whether it's across governments, to bring together pretty much, a large chunk of the food and agricultural value chain and have transparency and accountability over data flows, and that these are some of the building blocks, I think, of that new muscular, effective multilateralism in action coming up from the private sector, which are indicated in these in this action agenda. Sonny, thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe if we could turn to some of our panel who are here. Jacob Kiefer, you're the Group Head of Public Affairs for ABB, but you also have a rather luminous background in the ambassadorial world, and I think maybe there's even been some connections with Prime Minister Leuven here in your roles as ambassador for Sweden, Chile, and Peru, and I understand also representing an ambassador for sustainable business and such for Sweden. But now with ABB, and having been involved in this action agenda, you have such a brilliant perspective on perhaps what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what ABB is doing, and we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts, Jacob.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure I will be able to meet all the expectations, but it's a pleasure to see my former Prime Minister. I still call him Prime Minister, as I call myself ambassador, once Prime Minister, always Prime Minister. But first of all, thank you very much to the Council for your excellent work, for guiding us, for helping us have this platform, for Stockholm Environmental Institute, obviously. Can I just start by saying how complex this is? It sounds a little bit like something you say to excuse yourself, but this is a really complex issue. We are a company present in over 120 markets, 100,000 employees, from robots to discrete automation, electrification, process automation, and of course, drives and motors. And I don't know how many product lines we're having globally. We are having 1/3 of our business in the US, 1/3 in Europe, and 1/3 in China, in a very complex geopolitical situation as we are right now. So I think the first order of things to be done for us is always to look at our own operations. And I think that word accountability, that we have now set targets for all of our managerials and for the executive committee members, that they will be measured on sustainability. If they don't reach their targets, they will get less bonus. Accountability in the sense also that we are transparent in our operations. So I think the corporate world's determined contributions must be more ambitious than the national determined contributions, because the national determined contributions won't suffice. So by 2030, like many of you here, we try to be carbon neutral. And we're doing that with science-based targets, etc. So we're trying to have somebody looking at and helping us with that, obviously. We also have a power to affect our suppliers. How did you get your energy? How did you transport it? Did you do it electrified? And we're right in that process right now, asking our 150 biggest suppliers, how do you do it? How do we know that the things we're buying from you are being sustainable, really sustainable? And we are being asked by our peers. So no matter what happens, do we have a protocol? This is already set in motion, at least for the larger corporations. And I'm sure that we hear the same from my colleagues here on the panel. But the biggest contribution for us is, I think, to help our customers to be more sustainable with our technology. And the good news is that a lot of the things that we need to combat climate change, it's already existing. The technology is here. We need help with the implementation of existing technology. But we also like to drive policy. And I think one of those policies is the uses of energy. I don't know if you know this, but today, 2/3 of the total primary energy goes to waste. 2/3. Power generation, transportation, industry, and buildings. So if we can get an energy efficiency movement going, we can actually save 40% of the world's total energy consumption. And one way of doing that is to start measuring motors and drives. How much are you using it? And if you start using these motion sensors, you can see that you can save 25%. And most of the electrification goes through motors, at least half of it. So this is an extremely important part, and we happen to construct these ones. So we think that's important. And the other driver, of course, is automation and digitalization. When we start measuring everything and we can put it up in the cloud, start to use algorithms, artificial intelligence, you really start to see things happening. We've been doing this for quite a number of years now, but now it's coming together. So I think this is extremely cool, very promising, but legislation is not there. The transformation and the transfer of data flows across the globe. It's a very complex issue. We have to take care of the privacy issues, and we need regulations, but they cannot be too regulated because then we lose innovation. So this is a task for policymakers, and I'm sure Stefan will have a solution by January to solve this for us. And if not, maybe we can have a conversation around it. Also, when it comes to recycling and the circularity protocols, like you said, they don't exist today. If we want to take a motor from one end of the world and ship it to Europe, what is that? Is that the trash? Is it a used engine? There's no protocol for it. And that needs to be addressed, I think. And let's talk about that together with you guys. I think this idea to have treaties, wonderful, guidelines, wonderful, standards, but we need to do that together. And I think this platform of yours is fantastic. So we're certainly up to do that. I will stop now because I'm taking up too much time, but we come from a country with free trade. We are based in Switzerland and Sweden, two very small markets. So I think we sell less than 5% of our turnover to these two countries. But the multilateral trading system is being challenged. We haven't done any major progress in the last 20 years or so. And I think the environmental sector could be a sector we can come together. There's no geopolitical tension around this yet. So I will stop there and say that please get some energy, inject some energy into the environmental goods and services in Geneva. I think that could be a low-hanging fruit. And let's bring this also to the table in Glasgow, from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh, and then eventually to UAE in 2 years' time.
Jakob, thank you so much. So again, so interesting that the amazing things that ABB is doing, and all of the kind of technology and the kit and energy efficiency is back. It never went away for many people, but you know it's back. And how do we harmonize standards and have kind of top appliances being used as the kind of common standard, a bit like they did in Japan back in the day, but also pinpointing. You know, if we're going to use secondary materials or repurpose motors, we need to fix some of these obstacles and roadblocks that stop you unlocking all of that value. The circularity protocol that that was mentioned. Moving on, and it's just fascinating because you know we've heard from a couple of dimensions here, but now here's a state-owned enterprise in the oil and gas sector, Malaysia, Petronas. One Sayuti, one Hussein. You're the head of strategy and policy, corporate sustainability. And we're delighted to have you here in person. Thank you for joining us in Stockholm. And I think perhaps some of the things that Eric Solheim was saying might resonate. You know, there's a major shift going on in some large pieces of the industrial infrastructure in the ASEAN region, in Malaysia, you know, in Singapore. We'd be delighted to hear what challenges that you're facing in that transformation and where some of these areas around skills and capacity building come in. But over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dominic. Ladies and gentlemen, I think let me take you, all of us, back to Southeast Asia. You know, ASEAN is you know, economic powerhouse. If we combine ASEAN countries, now rank number 7 as a global economy, right? And then fast forward, and in 2050, it will be number 4 in terms of size of global economy. So it's a massive opportunities in terms of growth and also in terms of making substantial and sustainable development. And Malaysia sits in the middle of ASEAN. You know, the big question is how do we make sure the next growth in ASEAN is something that's conducive to the nature, to the environment, and to climate, and to society, and closing this inequality gap. So Petronas started in 1974 as a national oil and gas company, right? So we entrusted to develop and add value to the national resources. So we started as a modest, small company, as a local regulator, and then grow to become a Fortune 500 company, right? So we have the ethos of, as a backbone of Malaysian economy, we are shouldering with the responsibility to make sure that we are moving in this transition to make sure that it's just and equitable and leaving no one behind, right? So I would like to share a personal story, you know, when it comes to leaving no one behind. When I was 12 years old, I received a scholarship from Petronas. So I grew up in this small town in northern part of Peninsular Malaysia. Both of my parents were paddy field farmers. Petronas gave me scholarship to go to a boarding school and to study, and later, after high school, to go to the States to pursue my tertiary education. And I'm not the only one. If you look at the system, there are many others like me in Petronas, and also in Malaysia and globally. In fact, Petronas Education Sponsorship Program has benefited more than 37,000 scholars all around the world. So these people are now leaders in their own respective industries and try to make change for the benefits of the global goods. And Petronas is driven by its statement of purpose. It says a progressive energy and solution partner enriching life for a sustainable future. So we strive to achieve this optimum balance of providing secure and sustainable energy while contributing to the economic development and society well-being. And when we announced our net zero carbon emission 2050 in November 2020, our strategic intent is to broaden the economic activities in Malaysia, really to catalyze the green growth, providing new job opportunities in low carbon economy, whilst addressing the key sustainability challenges. And in this journey, Petronas is committed to nation building and also nurturing future talents. Some of the example, we are collaborating with the Ministry of Education to really improve the quality of teachers and also quality of education in Malaysia. So part of the SDG 4 initiative. So our technical institutes and university technology Petronas continue to develop local talents and prepare them to be the leaders in the respective industries. And Petronas also actively in the startup scene in Malaysia. So we have Petronas Technology Accelerator Program and also our social innovation labs, working with the Malaysian startups to really scale up your innovation and technology in Malaysia, in the region and globally. And internationally, we collaborate, we establish technology and research center across the world, to name a few, with Imperial College London and also with the Harriet Watts University in Edinburgh. So ladies and gentlemen, Petronas actually at the heart of Malaysian economy. Why I say that? Because we have more than 5,000 vendors and suppliers. And these 80% of them are small and medium enterprises. So they may not be exposed to the external pressure when it comes to climate and nature and also inequality. So it's a role of Petronas to bring everybody on board. It's not just about one single company net zero aspiration, but really about the whole value chain. How do we make sure that every part of the chain plays its role? In fact, at the beginning of the year, we had a one-on-one session with all the vendors and suppliers, educating them on sustainability and climate actions, nature, and inequality. So that's the kind of role that we play to effect change in the value chain. In Malaysia, we are championing what we call CEO Action Network. CAN is a peer-to-peer group of CEOs from more than 50 leading businesses in critical sectors in Malaysia. So this group of CEOs and board of directors are collaborating to really advocate sustainability messages, really driving and elevating conversation on this topic, and also translate that into actions and performance on the ground. And at the regional level, we are active in this Asia Pacific Business Advisory Council, so ABAC. Recently, in February, we actually presented a paper for the APAC government to consider on how do we build resilience among the SMEs in ASEAN in the low carbon economy. So that's the kind of activities and partnership that we do along the way. So Petronas, we are strong believers that the whole of society and all of the government's approach is required in this transition, right? So to address the major sustainability challenges, we must collaborate like never before. The governments, the businesses must come together. Let's think about, new innovative way of doing things and challenge the status quo, and learn and lean on this global best practices and initiative. To that, we are very excited to be part of this conversation, to be part of this Stockholm Action Agenda, to really do our bit to effect change from within, and hopefully affect ASEAN, the next level of growth, and also the world. Thank you, Dominic.
Wan Sayuti, thank you so much. It's so interesting, that kind of connective tissue that an SOE, which, if I understand it correctly, $144 billion in asset that you represent, which is shifting not just one company, but an ecosystem into this new agenda, and the importance of that capacity building, your example, the leadership of tomorrow through to entrepreneurs and innovators, through to regional influence across ASEAN, which takes us to that sort of skills and development and capacity corporate muscle building as one of these areas of the action agenda. Thank you so much. Annika, if we can turn to you, Annika Rescue, CEO of Stora Enso, you and the team have been closely involved in this process and many other dimensions on the sustainability agenda, and seen as a real leader in the space. I think circularity and these sorts of areas are things that come up sometimes in the conversations that you're having and the things that you're leading in the regenerative space. I'm delighted to hear some thoughts and perspectives from you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity. And look, this is an area where I'm personally very passionate about. It's been like 20 years now being in business, and I started as an environmental and aquatic engineer once. I wanted to solve kind of the problems of the world, and this has been kind of the fire driving me and many of our 22,000 people in Stora Enso now transforming in the space of renewable materials, because that's where we are. And our company is one of the largest private forest owners, so and also our products are renewable products. So this is kind of, we are in the centerpiece of this transformation. And I want to connect to some of the things that we've said before about planetary boundaries, because growth and prosperity cannot kind of continue if we are outside of the planetary boundaries. And today we're breaking 6 of the 9 defined. So it's really evident that it's action time. We've known about this for a while. If we come now to circularity and how important that is, we heard Stefan Leuven talking about pandemics and the fragmentation that was for vaccine distribution. We know also the food system is challenged because of huge inefficiencies in the supply chains. And coming back to your kind of view that we waste so much energy, we waste food, and we waste materials in our systems. So how do we transform the material system, which I represent kind of with our people, together with the renewable energy kind of, or the energy system, and make sure that we take out waste. 100 gigatons of materials from everything we use in our normal day-to-day, everything we consume, so the consumption system as such, 100 gigatons we use each year of different types of resources. And only 10% of these resources actually get back in the system. So this is kind of such a huge waste. We can solve all the inequality, all the famine, all the lack of resources by just making sure that the resources are not wasted. And the linear model that we have, extract, consume, and dispose, it's totally out of line. And that's why we need the protocol that you've been speaking about. This is something that needs to be on the top of the agenda globally, and where we take away the policy roadblocks that hinder that development. Here we have some of the issues. Stora Enso, we have the 100% regenerative approach. So we focus on climate change, biodiversity, and circularity as our key areas for driving our transformation. But we cannot do it only in our own supply chain. We do what we've heard here. We work with other companies, our partners, our customers, and so on. But the roadblocks that we face are often when we work across countries. For instance, collection systems, to mention one. They are not set up today to take back materials, to be efficient in not degrading materials once they are used, to make sure that we have design for circularity, that you, even before you produce something, you have thought of how are you going to take it back? How are you going to use it again? And multi-usage purposes. I can take construction industry as an example. Construction industry stands for 40% of all the CO2 emissions in the world. When we design a building today, do we think about how do we make that as CO2, kind of the lowest CO2 footprint as possible? Do we think what happens to this building once we need to deconstruct it? How we take back the materials of steel and wood or cement and make sure that we bring them back to the system? Those are the things we need these protocols for. Those are the things we need, kind of this multilateral approach in order to succeed, to drive that transformation. I think each company can do what they can in their kind of value chains, but if we really want to accelerate this, there is a different kind of drive that also needs to be in place. I can speak about an example in packaging, which is one of the areas we are working, and you know, packaging is used for protecting food from going to waste. So it has a really important kind of role in the aspects of hygiene, of course, but also to make sure that we don't lose food waste around the world and food. But when we want to take back packaging after its usage and the consumer, we need to make it easier for consumers to recycle. We need to make sure that the materials are monomaterials, that they can easily be decomposed, and so on. We need to design for circularity from the beginning. We need to have energy efficient systems that do this in the best way, that materials are used in the cascading principles, defining which material is best used where. So all of these things is why these kind of multilateral systems are crucial to solve.
Annika, thank you so much for that. It was so informative, you know, driving the enterprise and knowing that there's 90% of the value that could be captured from what you were saying, and we're only getting 10% of it at the moment. If we could get rid of some of those roadblocks on some of the issues you're talking about around very practical things on circularity. So it's almost like we feel it could be there, and now is the time for that bridge to perhaps some of those on the new thinking on that kind of policy space, some harmonization in just some areas to get us there by 2030, if that's what the science is telling us. Thank you so much for that. Elisa Orberg, thank you very much for your patience. I hope you've kind of been collecting and collating quite a lot from the discussion so far. You are the Chief Sustainability Officer for Baker McKenzie, which is one of the leading global law firms, and it would be remiss of me not to say that Baker McKenzie was voted #1 in terms of global law firm brands by Thomson Reuters for the 12th year running. So, you're a leader in the pack, and you're a leader in the pack on sustainability, and you've been part, and your team's been part of these discussions. I know a little bit on circularity and fashion and other areas, but delighted to have your thoughts, and then we'll be moving to our close. I know that the ambassador in charge of Stockholm Plus 50, Johanna Liesinger-Peitz, is here as well. So we're very, very keen to hear what you have to say, Lisa. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dominic. I'm very happy to be here. I wish I was actually in Stockholm. And I'd like to congratulate the Stockholm Action Agenda, because it is absolutely necessary. It's crucial, I'd say, to move beyond the what and the why to the how. And that's what this is all about, right? And for defining 3 clear and practical action priorities. So I know you've kind of asked me to think about which action priority resonates the most for the fashion sector, which is difficult to choose, but I would have to say corporate accountability and transparency. For me, that is, there are a lot of interrelations between all 3 of the action priorities, but if I had to pick one, it's really the accountability and transparency. And I say that because transparency is not a new notion for the fashion sector. We have seen it for several years. We continue to see it. Consumer pressure on brands to be transparent, very tied to earning trust, sharing values, and the entire supply chain is a really, really critical piece of that. So the transparency around materials, sourcing, and the people that make the product is something that absolutely needs to be more transparent, and companies need to be more accountable about what they're saying. Raw materials come from a variety of different jurisdictions. Labor can be based in multiple different places, different working conditions, different standards. So to really get to a place where you can have that consumer trust, you have to have that transparency, and you have to have transparency that's backed up by something. So moving beyond, all of these statements and principles and aspirations, but really tracking what's going on in every single step. So similar to what Sunny said, working across the sector, collaborating with other brands, reporting actual progress on objectives. That's where that notion of accountability comes in behind the transparency. And I would say that's also how we get to make some progress on SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production. Yes. Because we're providing that transparency to the consumer, they can make more informed choices. So we are seeing a lot of regulation coming out to the accountability point, and notably across the supply chain. We're seeing it in the EU on the environmental and human rights due diligence legislation that applies to the entire supply chain. We saw something similar in California. We see something very similar coming out of the New York Fashion Act. So this is clearly not an EU trend. This is a global trend. And I think the positive effect on that and on supply chains in general is that we're going to drive progress across that entire supply chain, not just the tier 1, not just the tier 2. We're going to hit broader impact. So I think we are going to see more legislation, which I would say I am encouraged by. Where I do think we need to do a bit of work, and I think Jacob alluded to this earlier, or actually said it quite clearly, is harmonization of standards. If we want companies to be taking action to become more transparent and more accountable, we're going to be far more likely to succeed on that if we have some standardization, so that people are focusing on the data, on one set of rules, and not trying to navigate a million different schemes and try to understand what they need to be reporting where. I think we also need to be thinking very clearly about what is our end game? Where do we want to go with all of this increased regulation? And I think we're all pretty sure that where we want to go is to raise the bar across the entire supply chain. So collective performance. So we need to be very sensitive and sensible about how we're enforcing regulation. So I don't mean we should be giving people a free pass, but I do think we need to be applying regulation sensibly. We need to be incentivizing companies to work across their supply chain and not penalizing them. If we start penalizing companies, we could end up with consequences that will aggravate the social agenda, and particularly when we are dealing with suppliers in emerging markets. I think we need to bear that in mind. Fashion industry has very complex supply chains. They oftentimes involve workers in emerging markets. Those workers must be able to earn a living wage. They need to make sure that their communities do not fall into poverty. I think that's also an opportunity. So on the upside, there is a great opportunity in the fashion industry to work with local artisans, to help them upskill and to really improve the level of and the standard of living in their communities. So we've mentioned circularity. I think we are seeing circularity as well. Lots of regulations around waste, banning destruction of unsold clothes, encouraging product that will last longer lasting textiles, facilitating repair. And I think maybe more generally promoting a cultural shift, which is where we need to get to reuse, to rent, to donate, to recycle, and to consume less. That is also one of the elements on the agenda. So if we're going to promote harmonized standards and definitions around circularity, and again, so companies are applying the same thing, I think we'll be much more likely to succeed. So my overriding conclusion is the more that we can harmonize standards, so everyone's focusing their energy on actually making progress instead of worrying about what they're complying with, I think we will have a much better chance of success. And I also think that we'll have consumers able to understand data that responds to their actual demand for transparency and accountability, which will result in that trust that they want. So that, together with nuanced and intelligent application of regulation, I think is how we will arrive at getting improved performance across the entire supply chain.
Alisa, that was just brilliant. That was a perfect end to a discussion. If I was taking notes, there's about kind of 6 or 7 PhDs worth of information and insight going on here. The accountability and transparency, you kind of sketched out so beautifully, not just to kind of show who's leading, but to provide the kind of disinfectant of transparency for others, but linked to the harmonization of standards, these ideas of common definitions, common approaches, the cross-boundary issue, particularly for secondary materials flows, that sort of thing, and how difficult it is to navigate. Brilliant. Just the insight that you and Baker McKinsey bring from that other direction is so useful. So I know that the person who instigated all of this, I believe, is with us, Johanna Lissinger-Peitz, who is the ambassador in charge of Stockholm Plus 50. It was her idea, so it's not my fault that you're all here. But I have to say, just a big thank you to all of our businesses who've been online and here with all of that insight. And maybe I can ask you to step down from the panel.
Thank you.
Johanna, I can welcome you onto the stage.
Thank you.
The Stockholm Action Agenda was almost sort of conceived when you said, do you think that would be possible, that we could kind of mobilize that sprint and kind of lift some of the thinking into material that we can place into these dialogues and into the shaping the international space? So you've heard from a range of different business leaders across those value chains around the accountability and transparency, the circularity protocols, the harmonizations of standards, the skills and development, which is not just what we used to think about of we importantly need to reskill people in this transition, but within the corporate community themselves, like the muscle to cope with and speed up this transition. You heard from our colleague from Malaysia about how important that is for the ecosystem, and then this discussion about redefining value itself. So those are the things that came out of the process that you invited and set the challenge for us. I hope we've managed to do some aspects of our homework. But before you perhaps answer that, I'd just like to also, on behalf of all of the wider community, congratulate you and the team on Stockholm Plus 50 and what you've pulled together. I think it's you should be very proud of the build that you've created from the 50 years ago. So just a round of applause for all of the work that went into the event. It's just marvelous, and the innovation that you've showed to allow this kind of injection into the discussion. Ambassador Lissinger-Peitz, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those kind words. I think it has really been a joint effort, with Stockholm Plus 50 being, I think, a very different meeting than 50 years ago. 50 years ago, it was about the principles, it was about the institutions. today, it's really about the implementation and the accelerated implementation. And we heard, I think, very strongly from all of the high-level speakers in the plenary this morning, from the Secretary General of the United Nations, from the President of the General Assembly, from the co-presidents, Prime Minister Andersson and President Kenyatta, on a very strong message at taking this opportunity here today to accelerate implementation. And that is not something that governments can do alone. It's also something that business can't do alone, or civil society can't do alone. It's something that we actually have to join forces around. And I think that's very much what we wanted to achieve with this action hub. And I couldn't be with you for all of the presentations, but from what I heard, I think that was also very much exemplified from all of the speakers. And I think also if I look at the process during this spring, where has been roundtables with business on built environment, on mobility. There has been scientific reports from the report that Stockholm Environment Institute and CEW from India has presented, Unlocking for a Better Future, Environment and Peace report from CIPRI. There are, I think, a few things that somehow always come back in all of these messages, and also in the messages from country consultations, from regional consultations. And I can't do all of those messages justice here and now, but I just wanted to maybe draw three to the attention of this closing plenary. And the first one, I think, is the transition of high impact value change. And this is also why we are here today. And I think also in the plenary this morning, it was very clear that we have to rethink development, we have to rethink the metrics and approaches that we are using for how we measure well-being. And in that context, I think the work here and having the value chain aspect that kind of connects the things together is essential. So also maybe looking, we are just on the first, I think, 3 hours of Stockholm Plus 50. But maybe looking like tomorrow night, I think one of the messages that we would like to hear from member states and from civil society business who is speaking throughout these 2 days is the importance of taking action throughout the value chain. And I think also a very clear response from business that there is a commitment to do so and a commitment to be accountable to the commitments already made. The other thing that I think has come up quite a lot is the issues on, let's say, investing in planet also needs to be investing in people. So the connections between what we invest in for the green transition also needs to be felt by people everywhere. And that means that it translates to green jobs, that it's a transition taking place, that is moving the world from one part of the development for another, but that there are still new opportunities coming with new jobs in new sectors. And the third one, which is in a way what we are also celebrating here today, is 50 years of environmental multilateralism. But the world is quite different today than 50 years ago, and we have come to a point when there is also a new form of environmental materialism, when we need to work much more together with business, with civil society. And we have tried to illustrate this through this process, I think, leading up to today. And we hope that this is something that can continue to COP27, of course. I heard from the colleagues from United Arab Emirates for COP28, who also see opportunities of bringing this forward to the COP in 2 years' time or 1.5 years' time. Yesterday, we were hosting together with the US a roundtable on financing plastic circularity. Also a kind of group gathering business, financial institutions and governments to really illustrate that when the world now set the pace for a new legally binding agreement on plastics, for example, we also have an opportunity to do that differently and to include all stakeholders around the table. So I think with that and all of the work that you have done, the whole team from World Business Council of Sustainable Development, I thought I saw Rob somewhere in the audience also. Yes, Stockholm Environment Institute and everyone else who has contributed to this. And above all of the companies who has been involved and committed thank you so much, but it's not a thank you for all the work you have done, but it's a thank you for all the work you will be doing to actually realizing this, which is a start of something. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. So there you have it. That was the launch of the Action Agenda. If you haven't downloaded it, do download it. And if you're going to have one takeaway, it is that from the energy and the pursuit of the sustainability transformation that the business community is undertaking, there's a wealth of examples across these value chains. It absolutely links back to the heritage of the Stockholm Environment and Development Conference from 1972. And again, we're in that space of innovating within the international agenda of how to unlock all of that potential, but within a much shorter time frame, maybe 8 years or so to 2030. So it absolutely is a brilliant time to be in this space because you can sense the geometry needing now that connection between the business, finance, innovators, civil society, and the governments for that new kind of framework to get rid of those roadblocks, which we found are just stopping us accelerating that transformation. So we're delighted to have delivered the Action Agenda for you. We will continue the homework in collaboration with all of you from the international space and very much looking forward to it. I would also like to thank our team at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Claire, who is here, and the team who are also here, who many of you from the business side you've been interacting with, and very, very delighted and honoured to thank our members of WBCSD who've been so closely involved in all the work, and you heard from some of them here. So I hope that whets your appetite for Stockholm Plus 50. It's a new kind of conference where you'll be seeing those boundaries coming down between the different stakeholders to drive this transformation agenda forward. Congratulations again on the show that you've put together, Ambassador. It's amazing.
Thank you. We are not there yet, but thank you.
And with that, we'll close the session.